On October 12, 1492, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana stared into the darkness from the deck of the Pinta
and saw something that shouldn't exist: land.
Where his map said there should be nothing but open ocean for thousands of miles.
He just won a reward Columbus promised to whoever spotted it first, a fortune in cash.
Columbus stole the credit and the prize for himself anyway.
Rodrigo never saw a coin.
That small betrayal is a perfect preview of everything about to happen on a much bigger scale, because the real story of the Americas is far stranger, bloodier, and more fascinating than the one in your textbook.
Here's the first thing that gets erased from this story. There was nothing to discover.
Someone was already home. When Columbus arrived, somewhere between 50 and 100 million people were already living across the Americas, more than lived in all of Europe at the time.
The Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in the middle of a lake,
connected by causeways, with floating gardens feeding 250,000 residents. Conquistadors who later saw it compared it to scenes out of a fantasy novel.
because nothing in Europe looked like it.
The Inca ran an empire of 12 million people, with no wheels, no horses, and no writing system, using knotted strings called quipu to manage their economy,
and a road network longer than the entire Roman empires. What actually happened is one civilization stumbled into hundreds of others that had been thriving for thousands of years.
And Columbus wasn't even the first European to get there, not close. Around the year 1000, a Norse expedition led by Leif Erikson landed in what's now Newfoundland, Canada. Building a settlement archaeologists later excavated and confirmed was real, not legend. Here's the wild part. Norse sagas describe fighting with indigenous peoples they called the Skraelings, and eventually abandoning the settlement entirely. The first European colony in the Americas didn't fail because of storms or starvation. It failed because the people already living there pushed back and won. That story got buried for almost 1,000 years. Columbus's version got remembered instead, mostly because his voyage triggered something the Vikings never did, a chain reaction across an entire continent.
So why did Columbus succeed where others hadn't even tried?
Honestly, he was wrong about almost everything and got lucky.
He believed the Earth was dramatically smaller than it actually is,
which meant he thought Asia was just a few weeks' sail west.
Every expert he consulted in Spain told him his math was off.
They were right. He was off by thousands of miles. If the Americas hadn't happened to be sitting exactly in his path,
Columbus and his crew would almost certainly have starved to death.
Instead, after 5 brutal weeks at sea, with his own crew reportedly plotting to turn back, land appeared just in time. Columbus thought he'd reached islands off Japan. He was actually standing in the Bahamas, on a planet whose true size he never once figured out, even after 4 separate voyages. Now here's the part of the story that rarely makes it into the classroom version. The Taino people Columbus met paddled out to greet his ships, bringing gifts. Columbus wrote in his own journal that they were gentle, generous, and had no weapons at all. In that same journal, on that same day, he wrote something else, that with 50 men, he could subdue and rule all of them. Within a few decades, the Taino, a population that may have numbered over 1 million, was almost entirely wiped out. Not mainly through battle, but through forced labor in gold mines and diseases like smallpox. Across the whole hemisphere, the death toll was staggering. Historians estimate up to 90% of the indigenous population died within about a century. A collapse so massive, some researchers argue it may have briefly cooled the planet's climate as abandoned farmland reverted to forest. Here's a detail that surprises almost everyone.
The Americas aren't even named after Columbus. A few years later, an Italian explorer named Amerigo Vespucci was the first European to argue this wasn't Asia at all, but a completely separate landmass. A German cartographer was so impressed, he printed America across his New World map in Vespucci's honor, and the name simply stuck. Columbus, meanwhile, died still convinced he'd found a route to Asia. Writing increasingly desperate letters to the Spanish crown for more ships, more money, more chances to prove it, he never knew the hemisphere had already been named after someone else. What happened next reshaped diets, economies, and populations on every continent, an event historians call the Columbian Exchange. Tomatoes, now essential to Italian cuisine, didn't exist in Italy before this. Neither did potatoes in Ireland, chocolate in Switzerland, or chili peppers in India. All of it came from the Americas. Flowing the other way, horses, which transformed how Plains nations hunted and traveled within a single generation. As European empires, desperate for labor after wiping out so many indigenous workers, forcibly trafficked over 12 million enslaved Africans across the ocean. Also flowing the other way, smallpox and the brutal transatlantic slave trade. One voyage in 1492 ended up rewriting the menu, the population, and the economy of nearly the entire planet. So, discovery? Not exactly. A more honest word might be collision or invasion. What 1492 actually triggered was the moment two halves of the world, separated for over 10,000 years, were violently stitched back together. And very often for catastrophically worse. The New World was never new. It only looked that way to the people who showed up last. If this surprised you even a little, subscribe. There's a lot more hiding behind the history we think we already know. And tell me in the comments, which fact here shocked you most?